All right, welcome to the Online Marriage Challenge. This week, I want you to think back to when you were dating your spouse. Think back to when all those little differences you were so in love with, and it was romantic and exhilarating, that all those little things that were unique about them, you just appreciated so much. And then the years started passing, and those differences that were romantic and exhilarating are now just kind of frustrating and annoying. And where you used to see him as spontaneous and fun, you're starting to see him as irresponsible and he doesn't plan anything. Or where she used to maybe be thoughtful, now she's just nagging. So why does this happen? At this point, we start to get frustrated and we just want to change our spouse.
Yeah, that's usually the tendency is we want to make them more like the person we have in mind, more like our parents, or
more like us.
More like us is typically the response.
Yeah.
And we got to time out. We got to cut that out because here's the truth, is you can't change them. In fact, you don't want to change them.
Right.
Because God created them for a purpose. And once I understood that God created my wife to be exactly the way she is for a reason, I don't want to change her. And I'm not about to tell the creator or the manufacturer that there was a defect in design and he needs to recall her, fix her, and send her back. No, I'm not about to do that. And so what we're going to talk about today is ways of cracking the code. Yeah. I have to understand how my wife is wired and that she is different from me, that she has strengths that are different from mine, and she's got some quirks that are different from mine too, but appreciate all of it. And right. That you do have to understand, though, that this doesn't happen by accident. You don't just fall into understanding. Is you have to be intentional, like we've talked about each week, and find out more about your spouse. And we're going to talk about some ways of doing that today and how we can crack the code with our spouse. Mm-hmm. With every personality style, there's going to be some strengths as well as some potential pitfalls. But what I like to do is see the best in Mindy and just identify what are some of her strengths, what are some of those things about her, some of her natural tendencies that just make Mindy who she is and that make her so awesome. And those are some of the things that I fell in love with. Some of the things that are very strong for her is her planning skills. She's a planner. She's very methodical. She thinks things through. She's a list builder. She's very detail-oriented. In a lot of cases, that's not my natural tendency, so I looked to her for help in those areas. Another thing that's a strength of Mindy's that I really appreciate is that her creativity. I mean, she just has such an amazing creativity with our kids, with her job, with our church. And I even actually pull on her for things that are related to my job just because that's one of her strengths. She's also a performer, and I love that about Mindy. That's what caught my eye initially when she was a cheerleader, and just she's always out in front leading people on a stage in whatever realm of life. She's just a natural performer, and I love that about her.
Well, now that I'm filled up, a few of the strengths about Justin that are different from mine, and you could say, how he was wired, how he was created, its personality, its temperament. But one of the things that I really appreciate about Justin is his confidence. It's just a natural confidence, and that really gives me confidence as his wife. And secondly is his leadership ability. He leads the family well, and the confidence goes along with that. As a leader, I know he's making good decisions because he has value in himself, and then he makes good decisions outside of that, at work, everywhere he's at, based on the fact that he's confident in who he is. So the third thing that I really appreciate, and one of his strengths, is that just fun is the best way for me to put it. He makes life fun, whether it's at the family or at work. He knows how to infuse fun into every environment, and I think that's really important, that we put some smiles on our faces and we have a few laughs together.
And we've all got natural tendencies, and one thing I love about Mindy is one day we were talking about who's more risky, and I said it's more of my natural tendency to take some risks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Mindy's like, well, I take risks. They're just calculated risks.
Yeah. I'll take a risk as long as you tell me it's safe.
Yeah, exactly. And so that shows you a little bit of difference in personality sometimes. But also, with every personality style, there's also some natural tendencies for some pitfalls.
Yeah.
So these are some areas that maybe they're blind spots, some of the things that we can kind of fall into. And here's the thing, is that this doesn't mean that you can't do these things. It just means that it takes more effort. Mm-hmm. You have to be more intentional. And so I identified through studying my personality tendencies and styles and learning more about myself, I know that naturally I'm not very empathetic. I don't have the same empathy level as Mindy does as a nurse. She's very natural in that. And so for me to really see something from someone else's perspective, to understand what they're feeling, what they're going through, I have to be really intentional and focus on it and put a lot of effort into it, where Mindy may not have to put so much focus into it. But think about that from our relationship, that if I'm not always quite understanding the needs of my wife, or don't understand her perspective, or am able to naturally put myself in her shoes, it can be very toxic if I'm not understanding her on that level. So I have to put a lot of effort into my pitfalls.
Yeah, and one of the things for me, and this really hit home a few years ago, because before I studied these personalities and things, I didn't realize something that was very apparent to maybe some other, probably Justin, about myself. Once I studied my personality, I realized that I have a tendency to find flaws very quickly. Before I find a positive thing, I can very quickly find the flaws. And I have a tendency to be critical and to be negative or pessimistic. And so that's something I didn't even know about myself. I assumed, I'm a good person, I follow the rules, but I didn't even recognize that this is one of my pitfalls. So now, because I know that, I have to be very intentional that, as I'm talking with Justin, that before that negative comes out of my mouth, I start with something positive, and I try to put more positive words, because I can realize now that that could have really made our marriage tough. Yeah. If I hadn't recognized that this was an area I need to work on, I need to be intentional about saying positive things, because my natural tendency is just to come out with the criticism.
But the truth is, if you know Mindy, you wouldn't know that about her, because she's so intentional and being so positive and uplifting with people that you wouldn't know that she's naturally pessimistic. So here's the good news. Just because you have a pitfall doesn't mean that you can't, find ways of making that a good situation. Yeah. But knowing your natural tendencies allows you to kind of build a bridge over those pitfalls when it comes to your marriage, because they can become toxic if you don't know that about yourself. We call those blind spots, and we want to make sure that we sort of cast some light onto that.
Yeah.
So one of our core values is being intentional, and we talk about this every week of finding ways of being intentional in marriage, and one of those is being intentional in your growth. And so we're going to challenge you this week to definitely be intentional in your growth and find out more about who you are as a person and those natural tendencies of your spouse. So we want you to help you crack the code. And in order to do that, you got to do a little bit of research. We're going to talk about some different resources that you can do, but it's going to take a little bit of time, it's going to take some effort, and it's going to require you being intentional. But I'll tell you guys, once you crack this code, man, does it just open up the communication lines. You have those aha moments of, that's why she is the way she is, and that's why I am the way I am. And I tell you what, once you guys both take a personality test, and there's lots of them out there, I recommend doing a couple of them, but it gives you also a common language. There's so many times that Mindy and I refer back to the different personality styles and traits, and we know what the strengths and weaknesses, and I also know what the potential the pitfalls are without her even telling me, because I've read this stuff up and I've noticed those things. And so maybe tell us about one of the ones that we really have benefited from.
So one of the ones we actually have permission to talk about in this video is the 5 love languages. And we have the post there for you guys to click on the link and take the love language test. It only takes a few minutes, and it'll give you your love language, which pretty much means, whatever our love languages are, we usually have 1 or 2 top ones. That's what we're speaking generally to our spouse, and they may not be understanding that language. So it's important to know, what are my love languages? What are my spouse's love languages? Can we speak the same language? Can we speak our spouse's love language so there isn't miscommunication, causing conflict and unappreciation and all of that other ugly stuff? Yep. So definitely look at that. Figure out your love language, your spouse's love language, discuss it. You may even want to buy the book and read up a little bit more on each other.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of great resources out there. So Mindy and I aren't going to reinvent the wheel and try to explain all the different personalities here on this video, but we do have a couple that we want to refer in our Facebook group. And I'll tell you what, some of them might require a few bucks to go out there and purchase a book or to take a test. But I'll tell you, it's a great investment. Investing in your marriage is one that's always going to pay dividends. And once you guys can crack the code, I'm telling you, life gets better. It gets easier. It gets more fulfilling. It gets more fun. And once you have that understanding, that common language, you guys are just going to continue to grow and helps you to be more intentional and connect.
Yeah.
All right. I got to level with you here real quick. Throw in a quick disclaimer. Once you start learning more about your personality and what your natural tendencies are, and you begin to categorize yourself through these different tests, what you may fall into the trap of, like I did, is you begin to lean on your strengths and then make excuses for your weaknesses. And that's something that can get you in trouble, and we almost use it as a crutch. Because in a lot of cases, or in some cases, your spouse may need something from you because of her personality and who she is. And even though it's not your natural tendency, sometimes it pays big dividends if we put some extra effort into filling those gaps. Let me give you an example. If your wife takes the 5 love languages test and find out that she's a words of affirmation, she gets filled up when she hears encouraging words. But based on your personality, your natural tendency, you're not a big words guy, you're not a big encourager, and maybe it's uncomfortable for you to step out and to say things to lift her up or to point out those great aspects about her with your words. If that's her love language and that's what fills her up, even though it's not your strength, I'm telling you, it's going to pay big dividends if you can learn how to be more intentional and put extra effort into that for your spouse. And so even though we've gotten our natural tendencies, we still have to pick up on those cues of what our spouse needs from us, what fills them up emotionally, what are those things that they desire, and learn how to fill in those gaps and to build some bridges over those pitfalls once we know what they are.
All right, so our challenge this week, get on there, click the link to the 5 love languages assessment, take the assessment, figure out what you and your spouse's love languages are, and then secondly, take one of the personality tests. Maybe you want to buy a book and read it together or read it separately. Figure out a little bit more about how you're wired, how your spouse is wired. This will give you a lot of good information and good talk during your real talk time this week.